Hi, today we're going to talk about biomolecules. We'll do a virus and cell review as well. So again, we're going to review our virus information, our cell information, and then today we're going to really focus in on our biomolecules for some of that foundational knowledge. What you should expect? Well, we're going to have a note check, so please be intentional with your notes. We'll do a phenomena study, which means there's going to be a phenomena check. And you'll also have a CER, and this CER is meant to be a little lengthier, a little more detailed than the past CERs we've done, just because I have expectations that you are growing with making those connections and you're getting more used to the classroom expectations. And as always, this content should be something that you anticipate seeing on the upcoming unit test at the end. So we'll dive into our virus review. We've already taken notes. We've already done a virus brain dump when we talked about our cell types. So virus structure versus cell structure. And I like to do compares and contrasts because sometimes that helps us make more lasting memories and help us classify or categorize our information. So viruses, they're going to have that capsid. The capsid will contain the genetic material. The genetic material can be either DNA or RNA, and there's no organelles. Viruses are not living, so they don't have organelles to perform life functions. Whereas our cells, prokaryotic or eukaryotic, they're going to contain things. Our eukaryotic cells will have a nucleus for sure, and they'll have organelles. Our prokaryotic cells, they have a little bit less inside of them because they are a more simple cell type, but these still are going to have more things than a virus, for example. So how viruses spread and cause disease. So this is something we've talked about in class and you've read about in your textbook. So some of the most common modes of spreading viruses are going to be airborne and direct contact. So touching each other or being exposed to each other. Infection, well, viruses need a host cell because remember, they themselves are not a cell and they're non-living. So they need a host cell in order to do life functions. They can't reproduce or replicate on their own, so they need a host cell to do that function for them. So let's pause now because we've reviewed our viruses, but now I want you to do a brain dump on cell types, specifically eukaryotic and prokaryotic, and comparing and contrasting them. I want you to write everything you remember, so we'll pause here and we'll come back in just a couple minutes. Okay, so we've done that brain dump. And let's make sure that we're writing down stuff. So if you have a gap or maybe you've already written it, amazing, great, I love it. But for my friends who may have missed something, now's a great chance to add this to that brain dump page on cell types. So prokaryotic cells, they're small, they're simple, they don't have a nucleus, their DNA is free floating. They are going to be unicellular as well. And here's something that I want to make sure we clarify just because it's probably going to show up on a unit test or on a STAR style exam. And if you remember when we started talking about our cell types, we did a lot of note checks and we took our time with that. But one thing that can cause some difficulty is science is a little weird sometimes, not always. So we want to make sure we clarify something that I know will probably show up somewhere at some point. So, can prokaryotes reproduce sexually? Sort of, yes, but not really. They reproduce asexually through binary fission, where they're splitting into two identical cells. However, that's not the only way prokaryotes can reproduce or replicate. they can exchange genetic material, and that sounds like sexual reproduction, but it's not real or true sexual reproduction. So they can do this in a couple of different ways, which is really unique. And it's just something that if you hear people say, oh, prokaryotes are only asexual, it's a yes and no situation. But for a test, yes, they are asexual, just because test raters are going to be a little bit more precise with what they want. But in the scientific community, we know that they can come together and exchange their genetics through conjunction, transformation, and transduction. And these increase genetic variability within the prokaryote genetic population, but it's not true sexual reproduction. So I just want to make sure that if you hear this, I want you to know that on any test that you're going to see from our school district, they're going to say that prokaryotes only reproduce asexually, even though there are these 3 other ways that they can exchange genetic information. So, eukaryotic cell characteristics, very straightforward. Hopefully you included this in your brain dump. They can reproduce sexually or asexually, because remember, eukaryotics are going to encompass plants, animals. So plants can easily reproduce sexually or asexually. Humans, on the other hand, we are an animal and reproduce sexually. So eukaryotic cells, they can reproduce sexually or asexually. There's not a lot of clarification needed there. They tend to be larger cells. They're more complex. They have a nucleus, and their organelles are membrane bound. And they can be multicellular. Some are going to be unicellular, though. Don't forget our endosymbiotic theory we talked about. It came about in the 1960s by Lynn Margulis, and it explains the origin of mitochondria and chloroplasts within eukaryotic cells as being from a prokaryotic cell that merged or joined into a larger eukaryotic cell. So don't forget that. We want to make sure we have that in our mind. So what does that brain dump? What does your note page look like? Because hopefully you filled a page in your notebook. So let's look at what I wrote. So here's my brain dump. I want you to think about what you might notice. I tend to still have my little charts. I love making charts and graphs. I will underline certain things that I find to be important. For example, I still have organelle as something I've defined as a specialized cell structure. Ribosome equals the site of protein synthesis in both pro and eukaryotic cells. So ribosomes are going to be something you see in both prokaryotic and eukaryotic cells, whereas our nucleus is only going to be in eukaryotic cells. Our organelles are going to be in eukaryotic cells because they're membrane-bound organelles in eukaryotic cells. The eukaryotic cells are going to be larger. They're going to reproduce through mitosis and meiosis, and they're going to be more complex because it's got more stuff going on. I mentioned mitochondria and chloroplasts for endosymbiotic theory. I even drew a little picture. I love drawing pictures. Hopefully you guys start getting into that practice as well. And I have eukaryotes can be unicellular or multicellular. Golly gosh, just hopefully you included some of this information. And if not, take a chance, add it now, because you want your notes to be a great tool for you to use at the end of the unit before our unit test. Okay, so we reviewed viruses. We reviewed our prokaryotic and eukaryotic cells. Now we need to dive into our biomolecules. So this is not going to be comprehensive. This is our foundational information for biomolecules. And we have 4 types. We have carbs, lipids, proteins, nucleic acids. These 4 biomolecules are going to be responsible for building structures and supporting the functions within our cells. So this is why we talk about them in this unit. So carbohydrates, these are going to be made up of carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen. They are quick energy. They're made from sugars like glucose, and you're going to find these a lot in breads, pastas, and fruits. So those quick energy sources of like, oh, I just needed a little snack. A lot of our foods like that tend to have a lot of carbohydrates. Lipids, these are fats, and again, they're made up of carbon, hydrogen, oxygen. No, their structure is not identical to carbohydrates, but they are made up of the same elements. So they share the same three elements. They're just arranged differently and they have a different amount of each element. So lipids are going to be our fats and oils. These are energy storage. So long-term energy. This is also going to be responsible for a lot of insulation. Think about what you would consider a walrus. A walrus has a great deal of blubber. Blubber is a fat. It has a lot of insulation in the form of its blubber because a walrus lives in a cold environment. Lipids are also going to be responsible for that phospholipid bilayer in cells. So it helps form that cell membrane, and that cell membrane can let things in and out through having multiple layers within it. Proteins, and here we see carbon, hydrogen, oxygen again, but now we are including another element, nitrogen. And this guy over here, sulfur, he's in two of our amino acids that are part of our subunits for proteins. So sulfur is not in all of our proteins, it's just in a couple. But I like to include it because it can show up. The important addition here, though, is going to be nitrogen. So proteins, these are made of amino acids. They are going to be our enzymes, that type of thing. They build muscle and they transport molecules for us. That's what they are really good at doing. And we need proteins. And if you've ever listened to a health influencer, they love to say increase your protein intake. And that's because it helps you build muscle. Nucleic acids, these are not what you're going to find on any food label, but they are still something that you're going to want to make sure that you're aware of. They are all over the place. They are made up of carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, nitrogen, and phosphorus. This is the only biomolecule with phosphorus in it. So if you ever have a test question come up and they're like, here's an example of a biomolecule. Which one is it? And if you see P or phosphorus, you know immediately it can only be nucleic acid. So your DNA, your RNA, they are composed of carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, nitrogen, and phosphorus. So don't forget that. That tends to be a pretty popular test question for some reason. But your DNA, RNA, this is going to store your genetic information and it controls cell activities. Think of it like it helps you transmit information. That's what nucleic acid is really good at doing. So what do your notes look like at this point? Hopefully something like this where you've mentioned your biomolecule, the elements. I'm not listing those for no reason, so hopefully you're writing that down. The function, why and what it does, and maybe an example. And I didn't go deep into any examples here, but your textbook will. We'll talk more about it, and we'll look at a bunch of nutrition labels as we go through this section of the unit. So you'll see a lot of examples. So we have carbohydrates, carbon, hydrogen, oxygen. These are short energy. Glucose is a great example. Lipids, again, carbon, hydrogen, oxygen. These are long-term energy, so stored energy, insulation and membranes. Fats, oils, avocado is a great source of lipids. Proteins, here we start seeing a different element added to it. We have carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, nitrogen, and sometimes sulfur. This is going to be our structure, enzymes, movement, transport. Um, Enzymes, keratin, hemoglobin, those are going to be examples of proteins. Nucleic acid, so here we have our carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, nitrogen, and phosphorus. The only biomolecule with phosphorus is nucleic acid, and that stores and transmits genetic information. DNA, RNA, those are your examples. So hopefully you have a note page that has some of this or all of this information, and if not, now's a great time, plug in those gaps in your own notes. Okay, so let's talk biomolecules in real life. So carbs, these are used for energy. So running, thinking, you need carbs. And you're going to get these in bread, pastas, and fruit. Lipids, these make up your cell membranes. So the phospholipids, so butter, oil, avocado, those are examples of lipids. Proteins, these build your muscles, they form enzymes. And remember, enzymes can help speed up things in your body, speed up reactions within your body so that it doesn't take so long to get things done. And it also helps transport oxygen. So great. That was why hemoglobin was mentioned as one of our examples. Nucleic acid, this is found only in cells, so it's not something that you'll see on a nutrition label just because they don't write nutrition labels with nucleic acid mentioned. Your DNA, this is going to be your instruction manual. Common misconceptions, golly gosh, there's so many. But what I have seen in the past, mixing up the molecule functions, so who does what. Carbohydrates and lipids both deal with energy, but carbohydrates are short-term energy, quick energy, whereas lipids are long-term or stored energy. That's something that people tend to mistake and switch them up, so don't do that. Forgetting what elements are in the structure of that macromolecule or that biomolecule. So that can be something that we'll definitely cover, and we'll do some exercises in class to hopefully really hone that and build those memories. Just some key terms that I want to make sure that we're not glossing over because you're going to see these terms over and over again. So I want to make sure that, hey, I should write these down so that I know when I hear this what it means, and when I use it, that I'm using it correctly and accurately. So enzyme, monomer, polymer, hydrolysis, dehydration, synthesis, those are terms that we're going to see as we go through this section of the unit. So let's take a minute and think about, what should I write? So you could go to your textbook, or you could go to Google and just type in the words and go definition. Or let me help you out. We can make sure we have our definition. So I've included some here that I think are important because you're going to see these words come up over and over again in the unit. So monomer, this is a small building block. Think like an individual Lego. That would be a monomer. Mono, one. Polymer, this is a large molecule made up of monomers. So if you have one Lego block and you connect it to more Lego blocks, you can make a polymer, poly, many. So from mono, one, you can make a polymer from many. So they go together. Enzymes, this is just a protein that will speed up reactions. Nucleotide, I included this just because it's one of those things that you will hear and see, and you probably already have, and we haven't defined it. So a nucleotide is just a monomer, a small building block of DNA or RNA. So it's a sugar, phosphate, and a base. So just bam, that's a nucleotide. Hydrolysis and dehydration synthesis, these are two separate things, but they're both part of our polymerization processes. So hydrolysis is going to add water, and dehydration synthesis will take away water. So it helps in breaking or building biomolecules. So we'll talk more about that so it'll be more clear. But these are just important words to have defined. So even if you're not writing them down, I want you to know how to use them and interact with these words accurately. Okay, so now let's do something a little fun. So we talked about carbohydrates, we talked about lipids and proteins and all sorts of stuff. We looked at elements that go into these biomolecules. But now let's start making some connections. So our phenomena study, which you have to include in your notebook, don't forget that, my friends, is going to be based off of Velveeta shells and cheese because I had that available because my kids love to eat it and I also eat it. So we're going to analyze the nutrition label and we're going to do an I notice, I wonder about it. So reading a nutrition label, this is something you would have done before, but just to refresh your memory, we have just some of those nutrition facts. We have the 4 servings per container. So it's sold as a unit. It's a 4-pack. And then the serving size is 1 package. So just 1 cup of that Velveeta shells and cheese. And for 1 cup, that 1 package unit, your calories are going to be 220. So that's just a quick recap of it. All the ingredients are mentioned here. Your percent of the daily values. One good rule of thumb is if it's less than 5%, that's considered low. And if it's higher than 20 or above, that's considered high. And that isn't a good or a bad thing. Some things you don't want to be high and some things you don't want to be low. So that's why they have the percentages. But we want to think biomolecules. So I see total carbohydrates. I see protein. I see fat. What's another word for fat? Lipids. So far we're seeing our 3 biomolecules, carbohydrates, proteins, and lipids or fats. So we want to make sure that we understand. So the biomolecules that are mentioned, well, on that food label, we saw protein. It was there. Proteins build muscles. They make enzymes. They help us with transport. We did see sugars. We didn't focus in on that, and it's because it's Velveeta mac and cheese. There's not a lot. But simple carbs like sugars would be quick energy. Dietary fiber, there's not a lot in a Velveeta mac and cheese, and you'll see again, I'll show you the picture. But these are going to be complex carbohydrates and they help aid in your digestion. If you don't get a lot of dietary fiber, it can be hard for your large and small intestine to help you make evacuations. So, poop. Total carbohydrates, those were mentioned and we pointed them out. That's going to be carbohydrates, and that's your quick energy, and it fuels your cells with immediacy in terms of how fast all of this works. Total fat, that's going to be with your lipids, and it's long-term energy, and it helps build membranes in your cells. So that's just recapping and making connections. So, my friends, what biomolecules are most present? And I know my picture right here is hiding it a little bit, but that's what the right here is saying. Which biomolecules are most present? So we have total carbohydrates at 30 grams. We have protein at 7 grams, and we have total fat at 8 grams. So what's the highest number? They're all in grams. What's the highest number? That would be carbohydrates. Fantastic. Good job, guys. So I want you to just get into the brain space of doing an I notice and an I wonder next. All right. So which biomolecules are most present? We already pointed out that carbohydrates are going to be the most present in this particular example because there's 30 grams of them, and there are 7 grams of protein, 8 grams of fat. So now I just want you to do an I notice and an I wonder in your notebook. This should be simple and straightforward. Remember, I notices are something that you are observing from the information provided, and the information provided is just this nutrition label. And your I wonders need to be a question of what you're thinking about. And it could be a question that you might be able to have an answer to or know how to find the answer to. All right, hopefully you all have your fantastic I notice and I wonder already. And now we're going to talk about just understanding the nutrition label because it's been a while since you would have read these. So carbohydrates, that's at 30 grams, and we can see that it's on the label. We also can identify it from the ingredients. Those are going to be your flour. It's quick energy, and that's what our carbohydrates are for. So if you were to need energy to take a test, for example, eating a container, a single serving of Velveeta mac and cheese could be an excellent source of quick energy to get you through one test. This is not going to get you through a whole day or a whole week, though. So it's quick energy. Lipids or fats, this is going to come mainly in the form of the canola oil, the cheese sauce, and there's some other ingredients that also represent that. Proteins are at 7 grams. So that's mainly from the milk protein concentrate, and they're adding that milk protein concentrate not for flavor or anything. They're adding it to up their protein count because that has become quite the main seller. More protein sells more units. So let's see what our notes might look like. And remember, your notes should have an I notice and an I wonder. So in my notes, I have this taped down and I have listed my I notice, I wonder. I notice that this food is high in carbs and also contains fats and protein, which means it has all 3 major biomolecules. Oh my gosh, this is something obvious and it's pulled directly from the information provided, the nutrition label. My question, I wonder how eating this food might affect our cells. So that's something I could ask the internet. I could ask a teacher, but it's not a question that this is necessarily able to answer. So make sure you have your I notice and I wonder done. Okay, so let's make some more connections now. How are nutrition labels connected to polymerization? So remember, we talked about that. We even defined terms already. So now we need to broaden our biomolecule vocabulary and fluency. So when you look at a nutrition label, you're seeing how much of each macromolecule is in the food. So when we looked at that nutrition label, that's what we were seeing. How much of each macromolecule, carbohydrates, protein, fat, was in the food. And we're learning this because your body breaks those macromolecules or biomolecules down into polymers. Polymers get broken down into monomers and then rebuilt into whatever your cells need. And the do that rebuilding through polymerization. So either what they're getting, your cells need, and your cells are going to use them like ingredients. So your cells might need, your muscles might need more protein. Well, they're going to get the protein from what you eat, and they have to break it down or build it up to fulfill their needs. That's weird. That's weird. It might not be the easiest way to think about eating food as a way for your cells to get what they need. But that's what polymerization is. It's the process of linking your small molecules to make a bigger molecule. So from a monomer to a polymer, and the big molecule is the polymer, the meme. And sometimes polymerization needs to be undone. They need to do the opposite. So instead of building from a small unit to a larger unit, well, maybe you gave your body a larger unit and it needs to break it down into a smaller unit. Well, it can do that by hydrolysis. And so that's where your body adds water to break polymers back into monomers. And that happens in digestion. So hydration is important for digestion. It's also important for polymerization hydrolysis to happen. And that breaks things down by adding water. Polymerization dehydration synthesis. This is where we are building from smaller units into a bigger unit. Your body takes the water away to join the monomers together into polymers. Why does this matter? Well, it helps your body build muscle through proteins. It helps your body store genetic information in the form of DNA. And it helps your body make energy storage either through carbs or fats, so either short-term or long-term energy storage. So let's think about that mac and cheese that we already looked at the nutrition label for. So the label showed us 30 grams of carbohydrates, 7 grams of proteins, 8 grams of fats, and they didn't include any nucleic acids because the labels don't do that. But what you eat, the polymer, was the starch and the sugar, and it was broken into the monomer glucose, which is just another type of sugar. And it was rebuilt in your body into glycogen, energy storage for your inside your liver and your muscles. That protein, that 7 grams of protein, well, you ate meat, cheese, protein. So the meat part is really just the cheese protein concentrate that they added, and we're calling it meat because it's a little denser than just cheese protein. And that was broken into amino acids. Remember, proteins break into amino acids as their subunit. And your muscle cells, enzymes, they got that rebuilt into whatever they needed. You consumed, if you ate this little Velveeta mac and cheese, 8 grams of lipids, and that's mainly from their cheese and oil, the polymers, and they were broken into the monomers, fatty acids, and glycerol. And that was rebuilt into cell membranes and fat storage. And all food has trace amounts of DNA and RNA, but it's not mentioned because obvious reasons. That would be weird, I think, to see on a nutrition label. Maybe I'm the weird one for overthinking it. But if you're eating something that came from nature, it has DNA and RNA in it because whatever came from nature had its own cells, and those cells would have had genetic material. But I think I'm overthinking it. Don't overthink it because it'll throw you off of your lunch. So before we end, you have a CER assignment, and this is going to be a little more detailed than what we've previously done because I have higher expectations. So, which biomolecule is most essential for cell function? That's your guiding question here. I want you to develop your own claim. I want you to determine your own evidence that you'll use to support that claim. And then I want you to explain your reasoning. And it has to be your reasoning. Do not give me evidence again and do not restate the claim. That is not reasoning. So you will be graded on this more than just for a completion grade. I have higher expectations. So, which biomolecule is most essential for cell function? This is your guiding question. Develop your own claim. Come up with what evidence you think you should use to support that claim, and then explain your own reasoning. And here's how I'm going to grade it. I'm going to look at your claim, evidence, and reasoning. For a great score, I want you to explain why the evidence supports the claim, and I want to see science terms. For your evidence, I want you to use accurate facts and data. Don't give me something from ChatGPT because it's not always accurate. And your claim, I want you to answer the question. I gave you a guiding question. You can adjust the guiding question if you think that's going to be something that you need to do, by all means, but you have to include your changed question if you go off script from mine. That's all. So you know what I'm looking for. And again, this shouldn't be a long, lengthy amount of time that you spend on this, probably less than 30 minutes. So make sure you answer and complete, you know how I'm going to be grading this. So good luck. If you have any questions, please ask. All right. Have a great one, guys.